Hello, welcome to my YouTube channel. If this is your first time, do ensure to subscribe and like this video. And if you're already a member, thank you so much for the support. Today we are going to be talking about this bone in front of us, and this is the rib. Yes, this is our rib. This rib is a flat ribbon-like bone that extends from the thoracic vertebrae posteriorly to the sternum anteriorly. The rib alongside with the costal cartilage forms the costa. So the ribs alongside, probably whenever this rib is placed on the table and the costal cartilage is still attached, and they ask that what is the name of this structure. It's you can put rib in bracket costa because together with the costal cartilage, it is referred to as a costa. Yes. Now we have 12 pairs of this structure in the body, of which in some cases might be 13, in which it is present in the cervical or the lumbar region, or sometimes it can be lesser, which is that is in the case that the 12th rib is absent. So whenever it is lesser, the 12th rib is absent, right? So we have classification of this structure. So we can classify these ribs based on several things. The first one is based on the features. So the features and the characteristics of this rib. So based on features, we have the typical and the atypical rib. We also have classification based on the relation with the sternum. So the ribs that are articulating with the sternum anteriorly are referred to as true ribs. However, the ones that are not articulating with the sternum are referred to as false ribs. And we also have the third classification, which is based on the type of articulation. So classification based on the type of articulation are just three. We have the vertebral sternum, and from the name vertebral sternum, it implies that the rib attached from the vertebrae behind to the sternum in front. We also have vertebral chondral, and from the name, we have vertebrae and chondral. It means the rib attached from the vertebrae behind to the costal cartilage in front, and those are our seventh, eighth, ninth, and tenth ribs. And we also have the third one, which is just the vertebral ribs, and this is also referred to as floating ribs. And from the name, we can just simply tell that the rib only attached on the thoracic vertebrae posteriorly. Now let's go to the siding of this bone. Whenever we see a rib, how do we side the bone? There are three things I use to side this rib: the head, which is located or facing posteriorly, the anterior end, the part that articulates with the costal cartilage, which is facing anteriorly, and the inferior surface, the costal groove on the inferior border, the costal groove on the inferior border. So this depression that we can see here that is painted is our costal groove, and it is not seen on the superior border. So this costal groove, so whenever we see a rib, the costal groove, if it's directing downwards and the head is directed posteriorly, the head is directed posteriorly, and the anterior end is directed anteriorly. This rib, as you can see, is a rib for the left side. And mind you, they cannot specifically ask you to side which rib it is, except if it is the first, the second, the 10th, the 11th, and the 12th rib, right? So the reason why it is typical for the classification based on features is because those typical ribs have some characteristics that are common. Now let's just get right into the typical ribs, the characteristics. Since this is a typical rib, we'll be talking about our false ribs later in other videos. Our typical rib are our third to the ninth rib, and what makes it typical, it has, like I said before, a posterior end, an anterior end, and the shaft. So the posterior end has head, neck, and tubercle. The anterior end has a concave depression. This concave depression that we can see. This is our concave depression on the anterior end, as you can see, this region here. And our shaft has two surfaces and two borders. So we have our inner surface and we have our outer surface. We have two borders, the superior border and the inferior border. Now on the inner surface, we have a costal groove that is found on the inferior border or close to the inferior border. So on the inner surface of the shaft, we have the costal groove that is close to the inferior border. So that's for the shaft. We also have an angle. So 5 centimeter away from the tubercle, 5 centimeter away from this tubercle. This is the tubercle, head, neck, and tubercle. So 5 centimeter away from the tubercle is our angle. So you can see this region. This is our angle. It's just basically where the ribs take a sharp turn. So whenever you see a typical rib and that part is painted, it can actually be painted this area. So this is our angle of the ribs. And it's also referred to as the posterior angle. And take note that the posterior angle is just simply the angle of the rib because that's the most prominent one. And there's also the anterior angle, that's why it's called the posterior angle. And anterior angle is just located 2 centimeters behind the anterior end. So if you measure 2 centimeters behind this region, we have our anterior angle. It's just a slight, not really obvious turn, right? So 2 centimeters behind this region is our anterior angle, but 5 centimeters behind the tubercle is our posterior angle, right? And mind you, the posterior angle is also referred to as the angle of the rib, and it is the commonest site for fracture of the typical rib. So the commonest site of fracture, it can be asked that, okay, what structure is this? And the B part of the question can be, what is the commonest site for the fracture of this structure? So the commonest site for the fracture of this structure is the angle, simply put, angle of the rib, in bracket, the posterior angle of the rib. Now let's go to the specific features we have, like each part of these structures that we've named. I mean, in terms of the head, neck, and what they articulate with. Yes. Now the head, as you can see, so this is the head of the rib. So this is the head of the rib, and it has two facets. So the head of the rib has two facets. We have this part and we have this part. So this part is the upper smaller part and this part is the lower larger. So lower larger facet and upper smaller facet. Again, lower larger facet and upper smaller facet. Now this area, the upper smaller part can be painted and it can be asked what it articulates with. So the upper smaller facet of the head of the rib articulates with the inferior costal facet of the thoracic vertebrae above it. So if there was a thoracic vertebrae, the costal facet on the thoracic vertebrae, the inferior one, is going to articulate with this upper smaller facet on this rib. Do well to check out my video on thoracic vertebrae because I mentioned that, so that the inferior costal facet will articulate with the upper smaller facet on the rib. Now the lower larger facet on the other hand is going to articulate with the superior costal facet of the numerically corresponding rib. So if this is the seventh rib, this lower costal facet is going to articulate with the superior costal facet of the seventh thoracic vertebrae. So if this is a lower, larger facet of the seventh rib, it is going to articulate with the superior costal facet of the seventh thoracic vertebrae. However, since this is the seventh rib, this upper smaller facet is going to articulate with the inferior costal facet of the sixth thoracic vertebrae. So the upper costal facet of the seventh rib we articulate with the inferior costal facet of the sixth thoracic vertebrae. I hope that explains it. Now let's go to the neck. This is a part that is next after the head. So it has two surfaces. The posterior surface is rough. So this is the posterior surface, very rough. And here we have our foramina. So it receives foramina, that's nutrient foramen for the rib. And also have two borders. Neck has two borders. The upper border which is sharp and the lower border which is rounded. So this lower border is rounded and this upper border is a very sharp border. After the neck is our tubercle, and the tubercle has two parts. we have the articular part and the non-articular part. So the articular part is the medial part, while the non-articular part is the lateral part. This part that is shiny, that presents a facet, is the articular part and is the medial articular part, while this region here that is rough posterior to the medial articular part is the lateral non-articular part. Now this medial articular part can be painted. After identifying the structure, you can be asked what it articulates with. If you remember from our thoracic vertebrae, that on the transverse process of the thoracic vertebrae we have our costal facet. So this medial articular part articulate with the transverse process of the numerically corresponding rib. So assuming this is our seventh rib, this medial articular part or facet is going to articulate with the transverse process of the seventh thoracic vertebrae and be sure to write the costal facet on the transverse process of the seventh thoracic vertebrae. This is seventh rib, so seventh thoracic vertebrae, the transverse costal facet. Now the next thing is our shaft. Like we said before, the shaft has two borders, upper border and inferior border, and lower border, and two surfaces, inner and outer surface. The outer surface is convex outward, so as you can see, this is convex, and the inner surface is concave inward. And on the inner surface, in the lower part, close to the inferior border, we said it has a groove, which is referred to as a costal groove. So as we can see that in this area it is painted, and which is like a common steeple chase question. So this area is painted and this area is referred to as our costal groove. And again, you can be asked what structures are related to this area painted. This area gives passage for three structures, and if you want to remember, in accordance we have VAN. So from the uppermost one, or the one that is most enclosed in the groove, to the one that is not really protected in the groove, is van. So we have the vein, we have the artery, and we have the nerve. So the V is vein, and our vein is the posterior intercostal vein. It could be left posterior intercostal vein, it could be right posterior intercostal vein, depending on what side the rib is on. But since we're able to identify that this is our left rib, so this is our left posterior intercostal vein. The artery is intercostal artery. So we have our posterior intercostal artery, we also have our anterior intercostal artery. Again, it can be left and it can be right as well. Then we also have our intercostal nerves. So our intercostal nerves, intercostal artery, and intercostal vein all pass through this costal groove. But from uppermost to the lowermost is vein, artery, and nerve. So the most confined in the costal groove is our vein, and the most or the least protected by the costal groove is our nerve. Then on the upper border has two lips. So we can see right here, two lips, inner and outer lip. Can we see that? Inner and outer lip. So the upper border has outer lip and inner lip. So right here is our outer lip, and right here is our inner lip. And the outer lip give attachment for external intercostal muscle, while the inner lip give attachment for internal intercostal muscle as well as intercostalis intimus or innermost intercostal muscle. Outer lip is external intercostal muscle, inner lip is internal intercostal muscle as well as intercostalis intimus, also known as innermost intercostal muscle. So these muscles, they attach from the superior border and go upward to go and insert on the inferior border of the rib above it. So that is basically all for the ribs. Do also watch my video on the atypical rib 1, 2, 10, 11, and 12. Ensure to like, subscribe, and share this video. Thank you and bye for now.